Apple has finally updated their base 13-inch MacBook Pro after 2 long years, and it now packs some pretty incredible value with its quad-core processor and some added features for the same exact $1,300 price tag. Now the question a lot of you guys are having is if you can go with this cheaper $1,300 MacBook Pro instead of the more expensive $1,800 model and get performance that's good enough to do some professional tasks without having to break the budget. Now the $1,300 model does come with only 128GB of NVMe storage, so if you want to upgrade to 256 gigs, that brings the price up to $1,500. Now only $300 cheaper than the higher end model. So the question is, how much more performance do you get for the extra $300? And is it worth it? And of course, if you're totally okay with a 128GB SSD, then that's a $500 savings by going with the new low-end model. Now before we get into performance, let's quickly discuss what's similar and what's different between these two MacBook Pros. They both have the new 4th generation Butterfly keyboard with the new keyboard switch materials, which should be more reliable. They both have the same design, the same trackpad, and the same bright and color accurate display with True Tone technology. And they both get the same touch bar with Touch ID and Apple's T2 chip, which takes care of a bunch of system controllers and helps with editing HEVC video footage. And here's the biggest difference. The $1,800 model comes with 2 extra Thunderbolt 3 ports, which may be a huge deal for some, but others might not mind since USB-C hubs are so easy to find on Amazon. We also took the lids off the MacBooks and saw a few differences. The $1,300 model has only one fan, so it may not perform as well thermally. The batteries also look quite a bit different, and the speakers look way different, with some large down-firing woofers being visible on the $1,800 model. So let's do a quick speaker test and see if we can hear any differences. Let us know if you notice any differences down in the comments below. Other than that, there's not much different other than the processors. And looking at Intel's specs page for each CPU, they're basically the same exact processor except for 2 small changes: slower CPU clock speed and slower max clock speed on the integrated graphics. Now before we get into our performance tests and benchmarks, let's talk about our sponsor, Squarespace. It's never been so easy to create your own website. There's a huge variety of templates to choose from, and it's so easy that I personally created this business site in no time. Just click to add basically anything from image galleries to buttons and e-commerce products, and then you can easily arrange them. So make it with Squarespace. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/maxtech to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Back to performance, let's start with Geekbench 4's multi-core test. As you can see, we're getting around a 5% higher score on the $1,800 model, which honestly isn't much at all. And we're seeing an even smaller difference in Geekbench 4's OpenCL graphics test, only 4% faster on the more expensive model. Now let's do a more realistic test, Cinebench R20, which runs long enough to let the thermal stabilize so we can get a good idea of the thermal performance. Shortly after starting the test, the $1,300 Pro reached a peak of 3.72 GHz turbo boost, while the $1,800 Pro reached 4.01 GHz, which is closer to its rated turbo boost clock speed. Interestingly, the fans started to spin up about 30 seconds sooner on the $1,800 model, and they ended up being louder than the single fan on the base model. And near the end of the test, the temps on the base model were only 2 degrees higher, so it's doing a great job of staying cool. And the most impressive part is that even though the 1.4 GHz processor has a TDP of 15 watts, it was actually running at an average of 29 watts during the test. And even crazier, it stabilized at around 3.0 to 3.1 GHz clock speed, much higher than the 1.4 GHz it's advertised as. Now the $1,800 model ran at an average of 32 watts, only 3 watts higher than the base model, and the clock speed stabilized at around 3.3 to 3.4 GHz, only around 300 MHz higher than the $1,300 model. So the 1 GHz difference you see on Apple's website is completely false. Realistically, there's only a 300 MHz difference under load. And here are the final scores in Cinebench R20. The $1,800 model scored only 8% higher than the base. Moving on, we ran Unigine Heaven, a realistic gaming benchmark, and to our surprise, they both got the same exact score. And now let's run some more realistic tests, like video editing in Final Cut Pro. Starting with the Bruce Axe benchmark, the $1,300 Pro finished 5 seconds faster than the $1,800 Pro, which doesn't really make sense, so let's move on to our 4K stabilization test. Here, the higher end model was only around 5% faster, consistent with the difference in graphics performance. And now let's move on to editing common 4K footage that most YouTubers will be editing. Surprisingly, there was an even smaller difference here, with the $1,800 Pro being only 2% faster, and timeline smoothness being perfect on both machines. And here's where the T2 chip comes in, exporting HEVC footage. This time, the higher end model was around 9% faster, which isn't that much. And now getting into some heavy duty tests, we exported our 4x4K project and saw basically the same difference, 8% faster this time. And for timeline smoothness, it was basically the same, at around 12 to 13 frames per second. And now onto C200 RAW, which is a very tough codec. The $1,800 Pro was only around 6% faster, and timeline smoothness was identical, at 9 frames per second. And finally, exporting 4.5K Red RAW footage, the $1,800 model was around 8% faster, consistent with our other results. Now let's get into photo editing, with a couple of tests using Lightroom Classic. Importing 50 RAW photos was just a bit faster on the higher spec model, and converting them to smart previews was again just slightly faster. And exporting the photos to JPEG, once again, just a little bit faster, around 8%. So assuming that both of these models are equipped with 256GB SSDs, we're getting around 5 to 9% faster performance for 20% more cash for the $1,800 MacBook Pro. Now if you're okay with the 128GB SSD, that's 39% more cash for up to 9% performance. That definitely does not sound worth it. And yes, you're getting an extra fan on the $1,800 model, but all of these tests factor in thermal performance, so the single fan isn't really bringing the system down. So as you guys can see, the base model is really underrated, and it's performing much better than the spec sheet shows. Of course, the $1,800 model is faster, but is the small 5 to 8% difference worth the extra $300? Honestly, we don't think so. However, we tested the SSD speeds and saw that the $1,800 model's SSD is actually quite a bit faster. And even if you do upgrade from 128 to 256 gigs, the speed for some reason is still slower than the $1,800 model's 256 gig SSD. So you've got to decide, is around 5 to 9% faster performance, 2 extra Thunderbolt 3 ports, and faster SSD speeds worth the extra cash? To be honest, we still don't think it's worth it. Most people will be really happy with the $1,300 model, and maybe an SSD upgrade. But what if this much performance isn't enough? Well, if you're a video editor, you should check out our recent eGPU video, where we got a massive boost in performance. But if you're a photo editor, an eGPU won't do anything for you. But you can upgrade to 16 gigs of RAM because that'll actually give you a really good boost in performance. And if this still isn't enough performance for your liking, we recommend skipping the $1,800 model altogether and going for the $2,400 15-inch MacBook Pro, because it packs a more powerful 6-core processor, a dedicated graphics card, and double the RAM. We hope you enjoyed this comparison, and if you want to see more in-depth testing like compiling code and larger photo editing jobs, make sure to click the circle above to subscribe for a full review of the new 13-inch MacBook Pro. And if you enjoyed this video, tap that like button and check out that eGPU video right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.